Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this space, which will be about proof of work in general. But I hope you can hear me well. Kozal, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect, perfect. Welcome, David. David Vorick is with us tonight, which I'm really happy to be able to have this conversation with David. David, I already sent you an invite for to speak. By the way, just to repeat, on Twitter Spaces, you always need to use your smartphone in order to be able to talk. You cannot talk with on your web application for Twitter. And today I'll be able to talk with David about this very intricate field, which for me it was really always hard to comprehend, which is the relationship between cryptocurrencies in general and the hardware world, so to speak. And David is really in a unique position because he, as a lead developer for SIA Coin, would also enter the ASIC production field. So I don't know many. This is really a unique case that I know of, at least for someone doing that. So David really can offer a unique perspective on the intersection between these two. So because they are the disparate, let's say, points of view. Like myself, I was following cryptocurrency more from a purely, let's say, software perspective. So I wasn't thinking as an investor. I wasn't thinking like what actually goes on the hardware side of things. So this has, I actually began reflecting upon this only in the last few years, because in the Decred community we had some, let's say, we had a problematic related to that, and my introduction, let's say, to mining was actually long time ago with GPU mining, when I started GPU mine Litecoin and so on. But then I quickly found out that it's too much of a you need to specialize in this. I quickly noticed. But I would like to ask you, David, first, and welcome, David. And I would like to ask you, as a SIA developer, how did you, what mental process led you to decide that you want to go into the ASIC production field?
Sure. First of all, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Excellent. So yeah, the original drive to make ASICs for SIA was actually the threat of Bitmain and how much centralization we had seen in Bitcoin, in Litecoin, and in other cryptocurrencies. And so we felt like if we wanted to defend SIA, the best play was to make ASICs ourselves and let it be a community-centered movement. We wanted decentralization among the mining hardware rather than basically to be another coin in Bitmain's pocket. So that's basically where it got started.
I see. One of the things that really, if I just go directly into it, directly into the problematic of everything, let me ask you just clearly, directly, because these companies that produce ASICs, they're basically producing money printing machines, so to speak, right? Would that be a fair assessment of things? And then one asks, okay, if you're producing a money printing machine, why would you sell the money printing machine, right? So why wouldn't you just print your own money first, right? So does that happen, and what's your experience related to that?
Yeah, so there's basically one reason. No, I'll say there's two reasons why you would sell a money printing machine. The more generous reason, and unfortunately not the more common reason, but certainly the more generous one, is that it takes power to operate a money printing machine. You need data centers, you need cheap electricity, you need coordination and uptime, and you need technicians if machines go offline. And so if you're running a large mining farm, that takes a considerable amount of expertise. And so if you, the manufacturer, don't have that expertise, it makes sense to sell the machines to someone who does. And so basically, if they can operate the machines cheaper than you can sell the machines to the operators for a higher price than you would expect to earn by operating themselves, because your costs would be higher than theirs. And so there's like this, I guess, service that happens. So the operators are effectively providing a service to the manufacturer. So under all situations, the manufacturer is going to sell the money printing machine for as much money as possible. They're not gonna, it's not really smart to sell it for cost if you know that the supply and demand mechanics make it so that it's worth more than you're selling it for. You should sell it for what it's worth. The less generous reason, and most of the reason that you see manufacturers selling ASICs to operators, is because they believe that the operators are going to be willing to pay more for the machine than the machine is worth. And this often happens owing to an asymmetry in information between the manufacturer and the operator. Bitmain ran this, I would call it a scam. Bitmain ran this scam dozens, if not hundreds of times, where basically they would make a small batch of machines followed up by a large batch of machines. They would sell the small batch of machines, give everyone the impression that, in total, like say 5,000 or 6,000 ASICs had been produced. That means that if you do the math, each ASIC is going to be making $500 a month, and it seems like a really good deal. But if you, but then what they actually did was they made 50,000 machines, and they sold all 50,000 machines to people who thought there were only 5,000 machines on the market. And now you have 50,000 people making $50 a month each. Because again, mining's a zero-sum game. The whole market gets wiped out, but the manufacturer is doing extremely well, because the total pie, the total amount of money up for grabs was, say, 30 million bucks. Manufacturer sold 50,000 machines at $2,000 each. Their rake is $100 million. That comes directly at the loss of their customers, but again, they're playing on information asymmetry. And so generally speaking, just my advice to consumers is like, it's an extremely rigged, unfair game. You cannot win. If you are not a manufacturer yourself, just don't play. And then Bitmain's taken that a couple steps further by just being absolutely brutal with their manufacturing techniques. And identifying competition and just economically crushing them by overproducing machines and taking losses themselves. And so even as a manufacturer, it's like, if you're going to make machines and Bitmain's going to compete with you, make sure that you have an unfair advantage over Bitmain. And so I would say in general, it's a pretty bleak situation from the perspective of like, can the community get involved in ASICs? And I would say under the current environment, I would just advise against it. And we can talk about a lot of things from here, but yeah, I'll stop there.
That's really interesting. So basically, in the article which I just shared, which you wrote about this on the SIA Tech blog, you mentioned also there was some other, let's say, at least not that you don't have direct evidence of, but that you suspect there was some unfair play from Bitmain, basically like Chinese manufacturer in the last moment notifying you that they won't manufacture for you. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And that's something that, again, a lot of manufacturers have run into. If you are doing business in China or with TSMC, there was a lot of suspicion. Again, I don't think any hard evidence came forward, but a lot of like soft evidence and suspicion that Bitmain was pressuring its suppliers, both the chip manufacturer, but also and especially contract manufacturers, the people making actual like boards and chassis and stuff, would basically pressure them and say, if you want us to continue doing business with you instead of one of your competitors, you need to drop this customer. And we suspect that happened to us. And so we ended up not manufacturing with TSMC, and we ended up not manufacturing in China. We built everything in the United States. We had a Chinese manufacturer lined up. It was a lot cheaper. They dropped us inexplicably. We suspect Bitmain was involved in that conversation because, again, they didn't give us any reason that made sense. They just said, "Yeah, we're not doing this. We are backing out of this deal." And so we had to scramble to find a new manufacturer. And yeah, Bitmain is well known to play basically as dirty as possible. They just want money. They don't care about reputation, because when your business is making money printing machines, you don't need a reputation. You have a money printing machine. So yeah, it's a very, very cutthroat world.
I see. I mean, I guess Bitmain's like, let's say, what they're known for, or what they're good at, it's how fast they can bring a product to market, right? I mean, that's really impressive, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly one of their huge advantages was just they had a whole pipeline. It was very streamlined. I don't know exactly what all went into it, but we know, based on observations, leaks from employees, and other hints, we suspect that they had their to-market time down to about 5 months, and we suspect that they, in some cases, were even at 4 months, which is about as fast as you could possibly do it. And we think that they were actually capable of turning out brand new mining machines in 4 months. And again, that just made them a monster to compete with. And oftentimes you wouldn't, they would make a miner within 4 months, but they wouldn't sell it because of that time-old question: why sell a money printing machine? And so if you've only made, say, 5,000 units, and those units are producing $2,000 a month each, there's absolutely no reason for you to sell those units. There's no reason for you to disclose that they exist. There's no reason for you to disclose to your competitors that you actually have a completely working production pipeline. Again, you want your competitors to spend as much money as possible to complete bringing their own product to market. And then once that product's at market, you just dump on them. Once they've spent all the money and they're committed, you undercut them by a couple of months. You release all your machines. And so, yeah, a lot of times it would look like Bitmain's timeline was like 8 months. They took 8 months to bring the product out. But then you go and you look at the blockchain, you look at the nonce patterns, and you're like, wait a minute, these Bitmain machines have actually been mining for 4 months. And there weren't very many of them, but they were 70% of the hash rate. And Bitmain just basically was a very, very competent predator, is what I would say. They were super predatory, and super good at what they did.
This is a really good way of putting it. Like you said, very competent predator. Yeah. I mean, this was my, red pill. I was a little bit naive when it came to proof of work mining. I always saw it, as this most egalitarian, most perfect way of, because let's say that the function of proof of work, right? If it's security and distribution, right, of the supply. And I always saw it as the most fair and so on. But then these realities you're describing, opened my eyes to many things that I wasn't really paying much attention to. And yeah, this aspect of the manufacturer mining for themselves first is is pretty problematic. Don't you think that it raises a good question whether proof of work is even viable as a solution for, not for Bitcoin, of course. For Bitcoin it would be an exception, but for altcoins, and especially altcoins that are coming now into the space. Don't you think that what we're describing here really raises the question if it's even viable as a consensus and distribution mechanism for new altcoins?
Yes, so that was the fascinating conclusion that we ended up reaching. So once we knew a lot more about the proof of work industry and how ASICs get distributed, we worked on the game theory and tried to map out, and we essentially ended up asking the question, what happens if you have what I would call an unstable monopoly miner who runs your network? And so unstable means that if they are sufficiently abusive, they could be replaced by a different monopoly miner. So they have to spend money, they have to work. It's not like a free monopoly. But generally speaking, as long as they're competent and trying, nobody's going to be able to topple them. And so the question was, does that still create an incentive-aligned, secure proof of work network? And surprisingly, the answer came out to be yes, it does. It creates a consensus-aligned, secure proof of work network to have a monopoly miner. And yeah, so I would say that even with Bitmain playing as dirty as it did, Bitmain is still tethered by basically one important fact, which is that at the end of the day, the protocol can decide to fork them out and replace all of their hardware, all of their expensive hardware, with a different algorithm and favor some other provider in a sort of protectionist move. And Bitmain has to basically be a good enough actor to avoid that consequence. And so, yeah, in general, I would say, though I strongly advise consumers just never buy hardware from a manufacturer because the game is so brutal and the information is so asymmetric. Even though you're going to end up with basically one centralized miner, that's okay, and the proof of work systems still function just fine under a single centralized miner, so long as the option remains open to hard fork and push that miner out. If that option isn't open, like it's just politically never going to happen that there's going to be a hard fork, it's a bit more tenuous, but I don't think that's something we really have to worry about in modern cryptocurrency, because there are so many cryptocurrencies that you can migrate to. And so if one cryptocurrency is being dominated by a bad miner, people will just move on to the next cryptocurrency or to the next blockchain. And so the miner still has general incentives to be aligned with the cryptocurrency because they have a revenue stream connected with the cryptocurrency's health.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And by the way, I'm just receiving people letting me know that there is seems to be a Twitter malfunction here. I don't know why, but it seems that our space currently is only working from mobile, and people from that are using the web application for Twitter cannot even hear us, unfortunately. I don't know why, but I'm sure that the recording will work well. So I don't think I will restart this. We will just go on, and people will be able to hear the recording anyway. And yeah, it's something is going on with Twitter Spaces right now, but no problem, because there will be recording available, and if you use a smartphone, it should work, no problem. So hopefully people will use their smartphone. Anyway, it's not possible to ask questions or talk otherwise. Another question I have for you, David, before anyone else wants to ask questions, just please let me know, request speaker status. But you like us in the Decred community, we who have been with Decred since the beginning, we were all really very much skeptic about ASIC resistance. It was always something that we as a community didn't really believe in it, or let's say we didn't believe that that's a viable path. Also because we've seen how it went with other coins, like let's say Litecoin started as an ASIC resistant project, right? But then after the GPU, no, it started even as a CPU only coin, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember well. But then GPU mining quickly came, and then the ASICs and so on. So we saw this story many times, right? How something started as an ASIC resistant project, and then because it's always possible to customize hardware and so on. So the Decred community went to the other direction, the direction of ASIC friendliness. Let's say the idea was like ASIC resistance doesn't work anyway, so let's just embrace ASICs and accept that that's the way things have to go. Because the problem with of course with trying to be ASIC resistance is then you can get like this hidden ASICs, right? Which is even worse. You can get a small group of people using ASICs, and the network isn't even aware of it. So that's a really bad scenario, and I think it happened with Monero and so on. And I from reading your blog post, I think you have the same, or at least you had the same perspective on ASIC resistance. But I think many in the Decred community have begun questioning that, because for two reasons. One is that what we saw happen with our situation with ASICs and like we discussed, how centralized and even rigged the game is. And on the other hand, by seeing random X being apparently, Monero's random X apparently being rather consistently ASIC resistant. So my question to you is, David, do you still have the same perspective on ASIC resistance, or has it changed in any way?
No, I still have the same perspective on ASIC resistance. I think it's an unachievable goal. I think Monero's main success in maintaining ASIC resistance is actually the size of their block reward. You can't actually make that much money mining Monero, and as a result, making a random X ASIC that is sufficiently competitive to be worth producing. I haven't done the math in a while, but when I last did the math, I computed that it would be, you'd need to make something like $60 million worth of hardware to be convincingly competitive, and then that means that the Monero block reward needs to be within however long you can stay in secret and not get detected and not get the community suspicious. You need to be able to recover that $60 million investment plus whatever returns. And so, if the Monero block reward isn't somewhere in the ballpark of $100 million per year, which it's not, that in itself is going to be ASIC resistant. So I think that you can take a strategy of ASIC resistance as a bootstrapping mechanism and expect it to hold out for a while. But as soon as your token becomes super valuable, ASICs are going to show up in one form or another. The other thing that you really risk when you have ASIC resistance, and Monero risks this and has run into this multiple times, is botnet exposure and nice hash exposure. And so someone with a large botnet can mine a ton of Monero, can double spend. Someone with a big nice hash bank can also mine Monero and double spend. And when you are in the world of GPUs, unlike when you're in the world of ASICs, the people who own the GPUs, if they end up, say, double spending Monero, trashing it, and Monero dies because it's been double spent so many times, they don't lose anything because they can just point their GPU to something else profitable. They can sell it for AI. They used to be able to mine Ethereum. That's gone. But there are enough GPU coins out there, and now that AI is on the scene, there's enough ways to make money selling your GPU to AI that it became more or less irrelevant. It's more or less irrelevant to you whether one particular source of income disappears. And so you have this problem when you're GPU friendly or CPU friendly, that you're just really cheap to attack because the cost of attack is the operating expenses, not the capital expenses. When you are an ASIC backed token, though, the cost of attacking you is the capital expenses, and it includes the cost of the hardware as well, because that hardware is by design unable to point at anything else.
Oh, interesting. But just returning a little bit to RandomX, do you believe, like, just from a fundamental perspective, do you believe it's even possible to say that an algorithm would be really ASIC resistant?
No, I don't believe it's possible. And basically, here's the reason why. So an ASIC fundamentally is just a bunch of logic gates. And in the world of ASICs, they've been hyper optimized to meet one specific set of criteria, one specific algorithm. So when you talk about something like how a CPU does SHA-256, it does an add operation, and then you have a clock cycle, and it goes back to the top of the CPU register, and it comes through, and it does, a bit shift, and it does some XORs. And there's like this very complicated pipeline because the CPU needs to be able to do a large, very wide array of things. And so the CPU, after every addition, it has this like reset where it can go and do anything else. And that reset is very expensive. When you have a SHA-256 ASIC, what you basically do is you cut out all the resets, you cut out all the extra gates, and you make it just this very streamlined set of electrical signals. And it's much faster. It costs much less energy. It takes much less space per computation. And so you just make, and the performance gains tend to be a factor of 1,000. So the main idea behind ASIC resistance is like, you look at a target piece of hardware, either a CPU or a GPU. I think RandomX looks at CPUs, although I'm not 100% sure on whether RandomX targets CPUs or GPUs. So I'm going to say GPUs because that's what I would try for if I were to build RandomX. But you look at the instructions on the GPUs, and it's like, okay, GPUs can do adds, they can do matrix multiplication, they have these like shaders. And so you look at how those instructions work, and you try to design the algorithm such that you have to use basically the full capability of the GPU in order to complete the algorithm. And so that's the main idea behind RandomX, is that it's like actually the algorithm itself is like a whole CPU. And depending on what your seed is, the CPU is going to have all this like branching and arbitrary it's going to have an arbitrary process to produce the computation. And that's something that in order to replicate in an ASIC, you basically end up having to make your ASIC look like a GPU. And so the goal of an algorithm like RandomX, again, is to take a target piece of hardware, look at how that hardware works, and then make it so that the optimal hardware would match the target hardware. And so that's where you get most of your advantage. But the reason why it never works all the way is because general purpose hardware is just fundamentally designed to operate in different conditions than mining hardware. Typically, especially if it's a consumer piece of hardware, it's going to have temperature tolerances. It's going to be optimized to run fast rather than to run power efficient. And you're generally not pushing the gates as far as you possibly can. If you're making mining hardware, you can narrow your constraints a lot more. You know that the temperature tolerances are different. You know that you're targeting a super low voltage, and you can make all these customizations that fit into this like neat little mining envelope. You can make all these expectations like, for example, consumer hardware needs to be pretty reliable. Mining hardware, it's fine if it breaks, because you care much more about expected value overall rather than caring about making sure that when a consumer buys a GPU, that GPU is going to last several years. to keep the consumer happy. But in mining, you really don't care if one of your GPUs breaks in 3 months or in 2 months, as long as on average they work super well. And so basically, because mining is fundamentally like more curated and more targeted and more focused, the hardware engineer that's trying to optimize the circuit can take a lot of shortcuts that simply aren't available to the hardware engineer who's trying to design a CPU. And so in the end, you know, the advantage that a custom ASIC for RandomX has over a GPU is going to be, you know, maybe 30% or 50%, whereas the advantage that a custom ASIC for SHA-2 is, like I said, like 1000x. And so because your advantage is only like 30% to 50% as opposed to 1000x, the amount of machines that you need to produce and the cost advantage that you need to have, like the equation changes a bunch. It's still there, but the equation changes a bunch, and so it's a lot more expensive. And so RandomX is ASIC resistant, but it's not ASIC proof. And then the other thing that I guess I can touch on that I missed, the other like big optimization, is that when you're building an ASIC for mining purposes, you can expect it to be in a rig, right? A GPU is going to be in a GPU card, and then that has all of its own overheads. An ASIC is going to be in a mining machine where the heatsink situation is different, like the fan situation is different, how it's mounted to the server is different, and again, there are just a lot more. You have a lot more wiggle room to create optimizations and performance shortcuts that would never fly in a consumer GPU or even a server GPU.
That's really interesting. So yes, it's always possible to improve with custom hardware, but I'm also I try to restart my Twitter app, so I hope now things will get better. I'm still getting reports that some people have hard time connecting. I wonder if Kozel, are you here?
Yep.
I wonder, what do you think? Should we try to restart, or what's your opinion now? I don't know what happened, because this is the first time I'm having some troubles with Twitter Spaces. Never had them before.
Well, I've been having trouble with Spaces basically for as long as we've been doing them. So
yeah, okay.
This is nothing new. But I think if David's game to give it another go, to kind of potentially open this conversation up to a larger community, then it's worth giving it a try.
David, would you be open to, like, I just close this space and I probably make another one and we try again in like 5 minutes? Would you be open to that? Because I want more people to come. It seems like many people more want to come and they cannot get in for some reason.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.